So hi everyone, I'm Kim. I'm a hip hop academic and sociologist. So I supervise bachelor and master students who all do research on hip hop culture. So they all want to get their title in hip hop studies. And next to that, I'm also a PhD candidate. So I'm getting my doctoral in hip hop studies. And I actually try to investigate how black young people in Atlanta and in Amsterdam actually interpret the images of masculinity and femininity in commercial rap music videos and how it actually relate to their self-images. So I also kind of claim Atlanta because I'm there, almost 6 months per year. That PhD is a never-ending story, but what I also want to tell you, the reason why I focus on commercial rap is that it's being stigmatized and scrutinized a lot in media. And I can kind of see it. I see there are ways we can do better, right, as a community. But I also feel it's very important to contextualize commercial rap music videos. Like a lot of values that you see in commercial rap is actually a reflection of values in larger society, like capitalism and certain gender relations. I think it's also very important to talk about the commercialization process, right? Like how did we get there? How do images look the way they look? And I also think it's very important to keep the consumer in mind because consumers are active people. They are able to negotiate images. So it's not that when you watch a commercial rap music video that you actually copy every value that you see in the video. You can say like, okay, I kind of like this. Let me get that positive message out of the music video and all the negativity, I don't care for that. Next to that, I also investigate how strip club dancers actually are important gatekeepers when it comes to commercial rap. So whenever I talk about commercial rap in the media, because the media loves to, scrutinize rap music, I think it's very important to tell the whole story of the hip-hop community and, of course, how it relates to society at large. I also try to create awareness of the link between hip-hop culture and kitty kotti and of course African heritage, what Aruna also said, because we all know that hip-hop is rooted in African heritage. It's about West African diasporic experiences, and of course rap itself is derived from African oral traditions and also narrative stories. Like a lot of rappers, the way they talk, the stories that they tell, you can actually relate that to African traditions in the past. But also, during slavery time, drum beats were actually used to coordinate slave uprisings. And now, certain drum beats is actually what connects or attracts the African diaspora to rap music. So it's really interesting to make that connection also. Like next to the shared history of oppression is also like a certain beat that people love about, or African people love about rap music. And that same beat was used to actually coordinate slave uprisings. So I can go on and on about my PhD research, but I would love to give the floor to the amazing Mitchell. He's gonna start with a presentation. And after that, we're gonna talk about power relations in current society and how we can also relate that to the slavery times. So please give it up for Mitchell.
Thank you. Mic check, yeah. Thanks for the wonderful introduction and thanks for the invite. It's always lovely to be here at Hip Hop House. Feels like home away from home, all the way in Rotterdam. And I would love to hear more about your research actually, but maybe next time or during the Q&A. So I was asked to share some thoughts about the connection between Kitty Kotti, the history of slavery, and hip hop. And I have to say also for me it was very, nice to talk about something that I'm used to. I often give talks about, different aspects of black history, but this is definitely a very important one. So I'll give a short talk, a short 20, 30 minutes, and then we will engage in a conversation. But if there are any questions in between, I'm fine with any interventions or questions. But let me start with introducing myself. I see a few people I'm familiar with, but also some people I don't know. So let me introduce myself a little bit. And I'll do that by showing a few pictures. I was born and bred in Amsterdam. Love to be here though. Congrats on the championship. My parents are from Suriname, but I was born and bred in Amsterdam, as I said. And I come from quite a big family, Familie Esajas. My grandma had 15 kids. Grandpa had 16, one slipped in between. And all those children had a lot of children. Why am I saying that? It's because I have more than 50 cousins spread between Suriname, the Netherlands, Caribbean, a few in Rotterdam as well. And I was the first one in my branch of the family to go to VWO, so to the pre-academic level of secondary education. And you can try to guess where I'm standing on the first week of school. 50-50 odds. Little guy in the middle, that's me. And you can see I'm looking a bit like, hey, is this real? Because, I was the first one to go to VWO. A few years later, I was still there. And as you can see, I grew a little bit, or had grown a little bit. It's a bit easier to spot me. A little bit of man spreading going on there. But reason I'm showing this is because, as you can see, I was the only black boy in class. And looking back, I think that sparked my interest in these kinds of topics, because I noticed that I went to school on the lyceum, so you had all levels of school. And in the breaks, there was a lot of diversity, kids from all neighborhoods, from north to southeast, Belma to west, all walks of lives, all cultures. But in my class, it was always quite white. Another thing I noticed, and I don't have a picture of that, but I hope that you believe me, is that we had to learn a lot about history and culture, but obviously not about the history of hip-hop or slavery or colonialism, let alone pre-colonialism and resistance. It was mostly about something some people call the Golden Age, the Greeks and the Romans and stuff like that. But I did learn about it from home, from my mom. So at a young age, I already was like, hey, why do I learn about this in school? And at home, I learned something else. Finished school, went on to study business administration, also switched to anthropology and finished both. And it kind of became the story of my life, being one of the few, if not the only black person in a sea of whiteness. Hey, maybe you know the game, where's Wally? You can play that game with me here at my internship at KPMG. So this is what it felt like every now and then. Not really feeling at home all of the time, because you miss a certain cultural connection. I loved hip hop, I loved reggae, my classmates were listening to different kinds of music. So with a few friends, I set up a collective called New Urban Collective, a student collective for students of color, students from different backgrounds, especially black students and graduates, in which we try to, empower each other on the one hand, but also, learn about our histories and address issues that were not being addressed enough in our opinion. So that was about 10 to 12 years ago, 2011 we started, and we started organizing all kinds of things, lectures, debates, workshops, youth exchanges, every now and then a party, of course. And it was a lot of fun. But after a few years, we noticed people were, interested, not just students, all kinds of people. And in 2015, we were approached by a few guys. Their father was Waldo Halberdon, you can see him on the picture. He was a sociologist as well from Suriname, who did a lot of research on colonial history, history of slavery, Kitty Kotti, etc. But he didn't just look at the history itself. He looked at how this history is being presented. One of the books he wrote is Op zoek naar de stilte, so looking for the silence. This one, Toekomst van het verleden. You don't have to read all of the text. But what he basically said is that history is often presented as if there is like one objective, neutral, national history. It's the history because it's in the school books, it's in the musea, so this is the history, right? However, what he said is that history can also be seen as a so-called reconstruction of the past, meaning choices are made about who we see as heroes, who we see as criminals, what we see as important, what we see as less important, who we name our streets after, Witte de Wit, J.P. Koen, and things like that, who we don't incorporate in our national collective memory, Anton de Kom, Tula. And what he said is that power is a very important role in the way we write history. Because the people that are in power also have the power to determine what the dominant historical narrative is. And so what the history is that we have to learn in school. And that then fuels how we look at ourselves, how we look at the so-called other. Because what happens when we don't learn about each other's histories, when we say national history only, the VOC history, for example, then we look at people who are not included as the others, who don't belong here. So he said we have to deconstruct it, decolonize it. But unfortunately passed away at a young age, and he left behind quite a large collection of books. So his sons inherited like 2,000 to 3,000 books, sent half of it to Suriname, half of it they shared with us. And we started in a small room in Amsterdam North. And I have to say, at a young age, I learned more about my own history and culture from my mom, my family, and from hip-hop and reggae music than I learned in school. And one other thing I learned from hip-hop, I brought one book with me that really inspired me, Russell Simmons' Do You, was to, create something, be creative, create something out of nothing or very little. And we had little resources, very few resources. We didn't have space, but we got the opportunity to use a little space in North. So we bought some cheap shelves at IKEA, put the books in there, and we called it our library. And a lot of people showed up, but we had to leave because of gentrification after a few months. It's a different story. So when we were looking for a different place, we ended up in the building where we are located now, which is in Amsterdam East. It's the building of one of the few black-owned organizations with their own building in Amsterdam. And it's owned by the oldest association of Surinamese people in the Netherlands, on Suriname, which exists since 1919. And we came there. We heard they had some space, so we just came there for a look. And when we came there in 2016, this is what their space looked like. As you can see, it was a bit messy, you could say. But we were desperate for space, so we made a deal with them where we said, like, hey, let's make a deal. We help you clean up. We can put our books there. Everybody wins. I have to be honest, in the back of my mind, I thought, let's throw away all that old stuff. But whilst cleaning up, we found out that there was a lot of fascinating material hidden in those boxes. These are just a few examples. Whole stack of Ebony magazines, James Baldwin on this Time magazine cover, first edition Malcolm X, booklets with notes from Langston Hughes. Anybody familiar with Langston Hughes? Yeah. Some people call him the Beyonce of poetry. He was world famous back in the days, during the Harlem Renaissance. Very interesting and important writer. So you can imagine that we were very excited when we found this collection. And we noticed that this was not just some random stuff in a box. This was a very special collection. We also found some stuff from closer to home. This, for example, was about from the 1970s, about when a lot of people came here from Suriname and the Caribbean, early from Turkey and Morocco. And we found out in that document that in that period, certain groups were not welcome in certain parts of Amsterdam, but also in Rotterdam. There was a policy to keep certain groups, especially Surinamese, Turkish, and Moroccan people out of certain streets. Also, this beautiful newspaper about a squatting movement in the Bijlmer, Amsterdam Southeast. And they were so fanatic that they even made their own LP. De strijd. Het koor van de Bijlmerkrakers. But also some beautiful pictures. This from a protest march in 1974. This one's 1971. You see the daughter of Anton de Kom. Anything else that you notice, maybe? Or that stands out? The Black Panther. Indeed. So what we found out was that in the 1970s, the US most of us, I think, are familiar with it, the Black Panther Party of Self-Defense. But via the archive, we found out that there were even Black Panther Party solidarity committees here in the Netherlands, in other places in Europe, because they felt inspired by the movement in the US. But yeah, translated those ideas into their own movement. Also, a lot of pamphlets about Kitty Kotti. This year, I think it's the first time that there are so many activities around Kitty Kotti. There are so many, I can't even keep up with all of those things. But we found out that already in the 1940s and 50s, people were commemorating, or even celebrating Kitty Kotti, which was a surprise to us because I knew more about Black American history, yeah? MLK, Martin Luther King, Civil Rights Movement, than about this part of our own history. So this is what it looks like, or looked like until a week ago. Yeah, so we made some progress, you could say. And it's been quite hectic and busy the past few days because we are busy with the renovation. So what I wanted to do is connect some of the stories that we found in our archives to hip-hop. As I said, hip-hop is something that inspired me personally. I learned a lot from it by listening to the music, reading some of the lyrics. I have to say I'm not an MC, I'm not a dancer. I studied anthropology, I'm an activist. Little disclaimer, I did not read all of the books. So I don't have the answer to all of the questions, but I do believe in each one teach one that we can learn from each other. So I'm really looking forward to the Q&A. So let me just show a few examples about the connections between Kitty Kotti, or the history of slavery and resistance, and hip-hop. If you recall, I showed a picture of the booklet of Langston Hughes and all those other interesting magazines from the US. And of course, we wondered where that came from. So we started to ask around, did some research, and found out that some of the books, especially those from Langston Hughes, were collected by a person named Hermie Haswat, Helmina Haswat. Has anybody heard of her before, except for the people who have been at TBA? Helmina, no? Okay, no shame. I didn't know either before we found those documents. So I'll give the short version of the story. Otto was born in Suriname in 1893, so first generation born after slavery ended. Hermie was born in British Guyana in 1905. Both ended up in New York, Harlem, New York, at a young age in the 1910s and 20s. And they met each other there, got married, and became active in the movement. Here you see Otto in Moscow, 1922, Soviet Union, right after the Russian Communist Revolution. You can ask the question, what the hell were they doing in Russia, of all places? Because in that time, most of the world was colonized by European powers. When we look at the US, Jim Crow segregation was still the status quo. And the communists, rhetorically, were one of the few parties and political movements who at least spoke out against colonial and imperial violence. So for a lot of people in the colonies, this sounded interesting. However, they thought, if you truly want a revolution, because that's what the communists were saying, we want a class revolution, a world revolution. So they said, if you really want a revolution, then you need to pay extra attention to black people. They called it the Negro question. So they traveled all around the world to mobilize people. And one of my favorite findings in the research was when we found this pamphlet about the debate, the great debate between Otto Haswat and Marcus Garvey. So for me, this was very exciting because I learned about Garvey via hip-hop and reggae. As I said, I'm gonna repeat it a few times maybe. I love reggae, I love hip-hop. And who knows Bob Marley? Of course, most of us. Otherwise, I would just leave. Bob Marley, you may know the song Redemption Song. I'm not gonna sing it because then everybody's gonna run away. but I'm not that confident yet. But hopefully it will play a part of the song. This part. Yeah. So that part, where he sings, "Emancipate yourself from mental slavery." Marley sang this, became very popular, but it's actually a quote from Marcus Garvey. So who was Garvey? Indeed, as some of you said, freedom fighter, uh, back to Africa movement. Was born in Jamaica, also ended up in Harlem, New York, set up a organization called the UNIA, Universal Negro Improvement Association. And it became the biggest black emancipation movement until today. Why? Because for that time it came with revolutionary ideas. Slavery had been abolished politically, on paper, but mentally, socially, culturally, economically, yeah, a lot of us, and maybe until today, I should say, a lot of us are still captured, you could say, in structures, power structures that were built during 200 to 300 years of colonialism and slavery. But what he said is that, we have to decolonize our mind, we have to emancipate mentally. Yeah, we have to love ourselves, love our skin, love our natural hair, set up our own businesses. So we set up the Black Star Line, a shipping company meant to foster trade within the African diaspora. In 1920s, that was revolutionary. So we had millions of followers across the world, from the Caribbean to the US to Africa. And in reggae, in Jamaica especially, you see the national hero. In reggae, a lot of them see them as a prophet. And in the US, he had a huge following as well. So you see, oops, yeah. Malcolm X's father was a Garveyite. If you've read his autobiography, you read that he was murdered because he was seen as a threat, because he was part of that movement. Malcolm X's grandfather, who worked in Atlanta, visited the church, was also a Garveyite. When you look at red, black, and green, the Pan-African colors, also inspired by the Garvey movement. So you saw that through hip-hop, through reggae, through music, those ideas of Pan-Africanism, those ideas of black liberation became popularized. And were passed through generation after generation. It was said in the introduction that this year we commemorate or celebrate, you could say, 50 years of hip-hop. And again, there you see an interesting connection between, the African diasporas. Because it was in 1973 that DJ Kool Herc, who's seen as one of the founders of hip-hop, used the Jamaican sound system culture to make one of the first hip-hop records. And why is it important? Because through music you see how that culture, that history of resistance, embedded within reggae, embedded within sound system culture, moved to the US, became part of hip-hop, and now influences the whole world. But there are many other examples as well, from KRS-One to NWA to many, many others. Black Star, most definitely, Talib Kweli is a direct reference to Garvey. Dead Press, I remember a few years ago we had the Power Talk with M1 from Dead Press here. Nas, one of my favorite MCs. And that's something that inspired me. This, yeah. When I was a young boy, one of the few black students at the university, it was hip-hop that continued to give me motivation, inspiration to keep working, to keep doing my thing. When we look at the Dutch context, hip hop, and the connection with black history and culture, there are some interesting artists, songs, tracks as well. I know hip hop is a very, something that, or music in general, something that touches people in different ways. So I can only speak for myself, what touched me, what inspired me. And for me, I have to say, Swat Licht has been one of the major inspirations. Soso Lobby, especially Winner. Shout out to the Rotterdam hip hop scene. Where you also see that they use their music and their platform to spread knowledge and ideas around black history. So, back to Haswat, and I'm looking at the time that I don't have that much time. But back to Haswat. They were active in the US, traveled all around the world. During World War II, Otto goes to Suriname because of health reasons, and within a day he's arrested. Why? Because he's a communist and he's black, so it's double trouble. So, after the war, they decide to come to Amsterdam. They become active in the Association of Surinamese People, which, as I said, was set up in 1919. And when they came, you saw that it really sparked a cultural revolution. So he passed away in 1961. Hermie passed away in 1998. And that's how, their collection of fascinating books and documents ended up in Amsterdam East. And we found it such a fascinating story that we thought, how can we make it more visible, more accessible for a broad group of people? So we connected with a few artists, visual artists, and they helped us to develop our first exhibition in 2017, 2018, called Black and Revolutionary, the story of Otto and Hermie Haswat. These are a few pictures of it. Brian Elsak was one of the artists we work with. He also works with a lot of hip-hop artists like Hef. And he got so inspired that he invited a few of his friends, DJ Flexicon, Rijntje aan de Praat, a few MCs. They looked into our music. We have a little music archive as well, beautiful LPs from the 1960s, still 80s. Remixed it, sampled it, and made a mixtape. If you're interested, you can check it out. It's called Lawine on Spotify. And what you see in black history, or in general in society, is that certain histories are silenced. Again, as I said, power plays an important role in the way we write history, but in general, in cultural production, including hip-hop. So often, when we talk about these topics, black history, that it needs more attention, and when we look at black movements, the focus is on, men. The leaders of movements are often, focused on men because of patriarchy and sexism and stuff like that. So we try to think about how we can prevent making the same mistake and decolonizing history, telling stories that were silenced, in a way that gives, honors black women who are often doubly silenced. Yeah? So Edith made this beautiful painting of Hermie Haswat, and for an installation in Venice, for the Venice Biennale, she made a whole series of black women who played important roles in different aspects of black history, such as Amy Garvey, wife of Marcus Garvey, but also activist in her own right, Sister Nancy, Claudia Jones, etc., etc. Nowadays we call it intersectionality. I'll skip a few things because of time, and I'm let's look at one more example of a connection between hip-hop, Kitty Kotti, and the archive, if that's okay with you. Yeah? Of course, yes. Okay. So, is today Saturday? Yeah, exactly in 1 week, 7 days, July 1st, we will commemorate Kitty Kotti, Dia de Abolition, Emancipation Day. This is one of my favorite findings from the archive. It's a picture from 1963. And as far as we know, the first Biggie Speakly, as we call it in Suriname. The first nou ja, walk, protest march in honor of Kitty Kotti. Taken in Amsterdam, and as you can see on the banner, it says free moeder, so we must be free. So it shows that there's a history of people using this day, this very important day, as a, a time to come together and think about their collective freedom, about emancipation. Well, over the past years, as we've seen, a lot has changed. When we look at the time Helberlin was active, not that long ago, 20 years ago, it was almost unthinkable that the Prime Minister and the Mayor of Rotterdam and Amsterdam would apologize for slavery. So a lot has changed within a few years. A lot of research has been done, a lot of activities are being organized, but there's still a lot of work to do. So let's do a very little quiz question. I think some of you may know. 1863, July 1st, that's the official day that slavery was abolished in the Dutch so-called West Indian colonies. But who were the people who were compensated? Or that the people had been enslaved and exploited for a few centuries? Or the plantation owners? Who says A? B? D? Okay, of course. It was D. Yeah? I think most of you know that slave owners got a form of reverse reparations, 300 guilders per enslaved person, 250 of Curaçao, 300 in Suriname. And on the wisselbrief, I brought a copy of it with me. You can see the amount of money that one of them received. One of them that we have in the archive is given to Dorothea van Utrecht, coincidentally. And Miss van Utrecht was the owner of Plantation Knip. Anybody been Plantation Knip, Curaçao? No? Yeah. Yeah? Do you know the story behind it?
Not very well.
Yeah. Nowadays, beautiful beach, you can swim, barbecue, beautiful. But it's also the place where the Tula Revolt started. Yeah? Because it was owned by this family van Utrecht. And as some of you know, July 1st in Suriname is quite a big thing. However, in Curaçao, Dia de Tula is a much more important date of commemoration. Well, this is my stamfather, my ancestor, Johnny Stephanus Esajas, my grandpa, came from Plantation Sara. So I'm going to skip a few things, as I said, but to make the connection between Kitty Kotti, one interesting thing we found in the archive was a video from 1963 where they interviewed the daughter of one of the enslaved people from Suriname. And I found a very interesting thing, because they asked the question, what happened actually on July 1st? What happened when people heard that they would finally be emancipated? Yeah, did they take revenge? Did they have a big party? Did they go to church? I'm just gonna give the answer. One of the first things they did was buy shoes. Yeah? They massively went to the stores to buy shoes. Why? Because one of the symbols of freedom were shoes. For enslaved people, it was not allowed to read and write, and was not allowed to wear shoes. That's why I think it's so ironic that one of the most popular street fashion brands nowadays is Pata. Pata, Surinamese word for shoe. Fueled by hip-hop culture, became such an influential brand. One of the pioneers. Nowadays you have all these other brands, but they really laid the foundation. And as an anthropologist, I find it so interesting that something that was forbidden for such a long time, also when we look at the language, Sranatongo was forbidden for a long time as well. My mother still experienced that she, could get whipped or physically punished on school, or even by my grandpa when she spoke her own language. And nowadays, we see that this language is all of a sudden part of, I won't call it strata, but the language that the youth speak. And again, we see the influence of hip hop. But what makes it sometimes a little bit difficult for me is when I see certain people of whom I know they come from very privileged backgrounds, wear the fashion, use these words, use the language without knowing the often painful history behind it. And that's why I do think there's a importance in doing these kinds of, organizing these kinds of gatherings. There's importance, even the responsibility for people active and profiting from what has become a billion-dollar industry to also tell about this history and its legacy in present-day culture. One of the founders of a shoe machine, and I think I'm going to end with this because you mentioned it in your intro just briefly. Indeed, how during slavery, music and especially the drum was a very important means to communicate stories and moments of resistance. And this is from that documentary from 1963. What the guy explains is how Maroons, so people who fled the plantations and fought back, killed the slave masters, or at least sometimes, poked back. I used the Apinti drum in Suriname to spread messages secretly. If you want to see the full video, I can make it available. So, again, it's an example of how through music, stories of resistance, moments of resistance were passed on from generation to generation, even in a context where it was forbidden or taboo for a very long time. This last part, I think I have to skip because of time. I think it would be nice to have a conversation instead of me talking a lot. So this was our last exhibition called Facing Blackness, which we made about 10 years resistance against racism in the Netherlands. I'm part of the Black Archives, but I'm also part of a group called Kick Out Zwarte Piet. And what we did in this expo was, what we tried to show us how slavery was legitimized for such a long time. Yeah, so you had all kinds of philosophers developing all kinds of racist theories for hundreds of years. Then we show how that became part of popular culture through children's books. I've brought a few with me. And what we want to show is that the past 10 years have been very intense, and we think that that played a very important role in the public debate and creating the space that we have now to address slavery and its legacy, because it used to be a taboo 20 years ago. But there's a much longer history of resistance before that against Black people and racism. And we shouldn't forget how tough it has been and still is in a certain way. Yeah? My car got demolished. I have a lot of friends who were confronted with physical and verbal violence. I didn't forget about your mayor, Dagu Talib, in 2016 when he arrested 200 people. So in 2020, a lot of people finally became aware that this was an issue that needed to be addressed. But Black people have been doing the work for decades, centuries, also in the Netherlands. And it is important to acknowledge that. It is important to honor that because all of us love the culture. When we talk about hip hop, it's the most profitable and the biggest genre in music, billion-dollar industry also in the Netherlands, very profitable. So let's respect the history and the structures behind it as well. I think I'll keep it at that. On July 8th, we will open our new exhibition about reparations. Geen heling zonder herstel. But we can talk about that during the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mitchell. Is this thing on? Yeah, I think it is, yeah. I first want to open up the floor to you to maybe ask some questions to Mitchell before I start my conversations about power relations and hip hop. So is there anyone who wants to ask a question? 5, 4, 3, 2. No, you maybe want to marinate it a little bit and maybe some questions will come up later.
It's a lot of info.
Yeah, it is, it is. And probably you explain it very well, so. So Mitchell, if it's all right with you, I would like to talk with you about power relations, hip hop, and colonization and decolonization. The first question that actually comes to mind is that current mumble rap is sometimes seen as a middle finger to power structure and actually maybe also a decolonization process. First of all, is everybody familiar with mumble rap? Okay, like it's like a slow way of rapping, kind of mumbling, murbling, future maybe, little baby, okay? Yeah, so what's your thought on that? That it maybe can be seen as a way of decolonization also?
I have to be honest, I've never thought about mumble rap as a form of decolonization. Um, and as I said, disclaimer, I've not read all of the books. I'm not an MC. I am a lover of hip hop, but I do think I have a specific taste. And maybe it's because of the work that I do, you know, as an anthropologist, as an activist, very interested in black history and culture and emancipation. And knowing the potential, the history, but also the power of hip hop to inspire, to, you know, share knowledge, to, inspire revolutionary consciousness. Mumble rap is not really spoken to me that much. So personally, I have a hard time seeing it as a form of decolonization. But at the same time, I know that, you know, music as all, and hip hop as all other forms of culture evolve. And there are certain groups of people, maybe certain generations who do feel it much stronger than I do. But especially in the context of the conversation of today, where we talk about the history of Kitty Kotti, the history of resistance, hip hop has a very strong potential to uplift people. And I personally, maybe others know, I've not came across mumble rap songs that were uplifting in the sense of, you know, sharing knowledge and talking about political issues. I didn't come across that. One side note I do have to make, I do think, you know, joy and rest and just having fun is a very important aspect of life as well. And now that people can vibe to it, I do vibe to future and things like that every now and then as well. So that's very important too. It doesn't have to be about politics all of the time, but saying it's part of decolonization, I don't see that yet.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you also see that there's like a combination between capitalism, what is rooted in slavery, and also activism. And let's talk about that a little bit. And I'm talking about like a Jay-Z, of course, rightfully so, is being criticized for his capitalist message, but he also has some type of activist messaging. So how do you make sense of that? Should we celebrate that or be extremely critically about that?
It makes me think about what I briefly showed, the debate between Otto and Marcus Garvey. And you can see I had like 100,000 slides. But it's not an old debate. When we talk about capitalism, slavery, there's a long history of, here it is. There's also a very long history of different, you know, political ideas and visions within black communities. So on the one hand, you had the whole group, Otto was one of them, of black communist or socialist inspired people who said, hey, the main issue that needs to be confronted is the system of capitalism, which continues to exploit people, and, you know, through class struggle, by focusing on, you know, the workers, we should, you know, come together with different groups of people, not just black people, but also other working class people. And capitalism is not going to save us. In fact, it will reproduce the same system. And maybe there will be a small group, a small class of very rich black people and people of color, but the system remains the same. And on the other hand, there's been a history of black capitalists. I wouldn't say Garvey was a very pure capitalist, but he did represent the idea of, that black business and economic emancipation would, was the answer to the issues. And when I look at this history, I cannot say it's either or. Yeah? I look at it at maybe an intersectional point of view. So I do believe that ownership, black business ownership, generating capital, generational wealth is very important, because from that position you can build your own power to challenge other structures of power. But the challenge is to do that in a way that you don't, reproduce the system of capitalism. And when we bring it back to hip hop and JC, I know there are a lot of discussions also about Beyonce, that they only, use symbols of activist movements and enrich themselves mostly, or a small group of people, and therefore reproduce a system of capitalism which doesn't, really contribute to the masses of black people. And I think, the answer is in the middle. As I said, we need people with capital, wealth, and positions of power. But I think what's most important is what's here on the wall, the power of the people. When the masses of people generate knowledge, or are being mobilized to fight against this system of capitalism, I think that is where the main solution should be, or will be in the future.
Okay, so if
I hope it makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I'm trying to summarize a little bit in my head. So there's like maybe like a middle solution, that you're not like anti-black capitalism, as long as there's still like some type of community-driven effort in it.
I think the focus would be more, should tip towards the scale of a community-driven approach. I am definitely against capitalism, but I do think that, black ownership, black business, supporting black businesses is a very important aspect of emancipation. But the challenge is to, develop a system where we can generate capital and wealth outside of the current system, which is built on exploitation.
Gotcha.
And I don't have a name for that system yet. It's something we have to invent, and that makes it so difficult.
Yeah. So let's talk about media a little bit, because sometimes I get asked to appear as a hip hop expert in media as well, and I do notice some type of power dynamic in media as well when it comes to hip hop, like the reputation of rap, the rap of rap. Can you maybe elaborate on that a little bit more? Do you think there's a power relation when it comes to who is visible, of course, and who actually gets to write about rap music?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a hard yes, that's a fact. Definitely in the Dutch context, I think, especially in the US, there's a much broader group of black professionals, creatives, who also have a larger platform, and also black-owned media companies who can look at the culture, write about the culture, review the culture from their own perspective. Whilst here, and we look at mainstream media, NSA, Parool, Volkskrant, who are the black writers, thinkers, who can, write and think about the culture from an insider perspective. There are very few, and the ones that also get the platform are even less. And what you then see is that our culture, hip-hop, but also in general, black culture is then being reviewed or written about from a very Eurocentric perspective, where whiteness is the norm. And because hip-hop, from its origin, always deviated from that norm, it's looked at as something different, something often, inferior, something that's, that doesn't fit the norm of what culture should be like. And we also experience it. All the exhibitions that we did, I think there's been mentioned in official, cultural magazines and newspapers maybe once or twice, and always from a very Eurocentric white point of view. But I think the power of hip hop and others is it doesn't matter. We don't care. We don't do it to get reviews and 5 stars from so-called white cultural critics who don't understand us, who don't come from the culture. We do it to inspire people, our own people primarily, but also other allies, people who are in tune with the culture, who want to contribute to, a better world, a better society. And yeah, I think that is most important, that you don't try to fit in or, meet a certain norm so you can get those good reviews, but, stick to your own standard, to your own norm, and really create from your own creativity and your own motivation.
Yeah, and it kind of ties in with Black entrepreneurship and ownership as well. But apart from reviews, sometimes, magazines and newspapers also just write about like hip hop or the latest events in rap music. Do you think, and probably it's a rhetoric question, but them not knowing always enough about rap music culture also causes more stigmas about that culture as well?
Absolutely. I think in general, and that was what our exhibition was about, facing blackness. I didn't talk about it in a very elaborate way. But when we look at blackness in general, and therefore everything that's part of black culture, and when it's looked at from the Eurocentric point of view, it's often tied to, preconceived ideas of blackness. And there's, unfortunately, as I show here, a very long history of the idea that blackness, anything black, anything originating from people of African descent are, unfortunately, inferior to whiteness. And although slavery was abolished 150 years ago, colonialism wasn't. As I said, 50 years ago, my mom, not 50, 30 years ago, my mom still experienced that speaking in her own language was seen as, je bent te vernederd. So this norm of whiteness is so deeply embedded within Western culture, Western institutions. Even when I studied anthropology itself has a very problematic history, but it's so very deeply embedded within institutions of art, of culture. There are so many students that I meet through our network that, face all kinds of obstacles, burnouts, because when they create from their own cultural perspective, be it hip hop or it's a visual artist, from their own cultural reference, it's seen as, not good enough by the standards of the art school in the Netherlands. And, that's why on the one hand, it's important to have our own autonomous institutions where we don't need that recognition. But I can imagine that it can be very challenging for students who go to art school, because sometimes you do, need the paper, the diploma to make a step forward. But to get to your question, so I'll look at these issues of prejudice, vooroordelen in a historical context. It's hundreds of years. These were these philosophers, these were the authorities of knowledge production. There are streets named after them. The Black Archives is in Amsterdam East. You have Linnaeusstraat, you have Vrolijkstraat, Kampertstraat. These were scientists who literally wrote and developed theories saying that African people were inferior. And Western culture, Dutch culture, is founded upon these kinds of ideas. And yes, we have made progress, but until the day of today, you still see, this notion that high culture, European culture is tied to whiteness, modernity, and especially when we look at hip hop, which has its origins in the ghettos, the underclass, the black masses, is still unfortunately seen as a little bit different. They won't use the words, but when you analyze it, it's still seen as inferior.
Now, you mentioned that there's a little bit of progress. In what ways do you think that social media and the internet, of course, plays like a huge role in it? Because I think like black people all over the world can connect now more easily. You don't also have to be dependent on papers like the Volkskrant. You can go to online magazines and stuff like that. So maybe can you talk a little bit about that, how social media and the internet maybe helps us progressing even more?
Yeah, I think it's essential. Coincidentally, this picture is on the screen. But when you look here, let's see, this lady, for example, this guy here, they're the Forsteds, the Forsted family. They set up a movement called Zwarte Piet is Zwart Verdriet in the 1990s, when I was still a baby. And they were already actively fighting against Zwarte Piet, blackface, it's a symbol of the underlying institutional racism and prejudice. But one of the main issues that they had is that were not given a platform to spread their message. And when they sent letters to the newspapers, they just laughed at them. They didn't take it seriously at all. Fast forward to 10 years ago, when I look at the archives and their letters, we're saying the exact same thing. But the difference was that we had our own platform. We had Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We were not dependent on Volkskrant or Parool or NSA or whatever to spread our message. We were able to mobilize people with a few clicks. Make a Facebook event, make a form. 200 people can sign up for a protest in Maasluis or in Rotterdam. And we were not dependent on the structures of power that they were dependent on 20 to 30 years ago. And the same goes, I think, for hip-hop. Nowadays, you see it with a lot of artists, independent artists, that it's much easier to reach out to your own following, your own niche public. So that really revolutionized and democratized media. But the other side of the coin, let me see if it's here. It's of course this, that on the one hand you have access to the world, but the world also has access to you. So this is only one of many examples I could have used. This is what in 2015, we had a protest in Meppel. We were happy, no one got arrested, so I posted the selfie on Facebook. And without exaggerating, within one day, I had people saying we should be stabbed, bombed, shot. People should put my face on the pavement and kick it like in American History X. So that's the other side of the coin. But at the same time, this helps because it shows exactly the problem that we are fighting against and that people tend to deny and would love to ignore.
Now, unfortunately, you had to deal with this for many years right now. What is your coping strategy? Like, how are you also?
I was talking to my colleague about this morning because it's a very busy period. Kitty Kotti, we are moving. We have accountants controlling. It's a lot. So, but honestly, music is a very important coping tool for myself. So when I wake up, I do a little bit of meditation. I don't go on social media immediately. I do a 10, 15-minute meditation. At least I try, not every day. But, that sets the tone for the rest of the day to keep a calm mind, to, stay centered, stay balanced. And, music, as I said, reggae, hip-hop, puts you in a good vibe. That's a very important thing to me. And thirdly is knowing yourself, knowing your history. Because when you know yourself, when you know your history, when you know where you come from, all that nonsense, all that bullshit that people are saying online, doesn't hit you. Because you know where you stand for, you know where you're coming from. As Malcolm X said, I believe you had it on a t-shirt. Yeah? If you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. Yeah? So if you know you come from a very long line of people who are not just docile slaves, but people who resisted, and even people who have not resisted, they survived one of the most violent systems and oppressive and exploitative systems in history. That alone can give you the power to, deal with the challenges in life. At least that's how I look at it and deal with it.
Now, I think I speak for us all when I say thank you for the work that you are doing. That's pretty amazing, and I'm glad you found a coping strategy or coping mechanism. Today, like hip hop, what you also said in your presentation, it's like hip right now. Everybody wants something with hip hop. When you look at cultural organizations, and they kind of try to use hip hop as a way to look more inclusive and more diverse, how does it relate to exploitation in the slavery days?
I have to say one more thing about the lesson. I think community is very important.
Okay, yeah.
So having spaces, safe spaces, community, where you can, talk about these issues. Where you know that you're not alone, where you can learn from your elders and your peers, like this. That's very important. So parallels between the system of slavery and current forms of exploitation. There's a very beautiful book that I read recently. Also met the author, some of you may know her, Trisha Hersey from the NEP Ministry. She wrote a book called Rest is Resistance. And I think she breaks down the system of slavery in a very interesting way. Because often when we look at the history of slavery, the focus is on the issue of race, racism. And the examples I showed, that black people were being made and seen as inferior beings. But Europeans didn't go to the African continent and ship millions of people to the other side of the world because they thought, okay, we're superior and we're doing this for fun. And the main thing, obviously, was to gain a profit, to use cheap or free labor, forced labor, to produce goods which were sold here in the West. And one other interesting thing about the exhibition we made, Facing Blackness, is what we tried to show is how that very long history, so all those racist ideas, translated into popular culture. So we had the children's books, but we also had this part right. Oh, yeah. Don't see it on this picture. It was separated in 4 corners. One was the children's corner with all the children's books and toys. One was the living room, where you had your daily, the objects you would find in a house. The other one was the theater, where you saw how these kinds of images, blackface and all these stereotypes are part of popular culture through blackface and also music. But the last chamber was the commercial space, the shop. And what you saw was that there was a form of what they called double commodification. And so black bodies were seen and used as a commodity. Something you can buy and sell. A commodity you can just trade on the market. But also the image of black people was used to sell that same commodity or to sell the commodity that they were producing. Does that make sense? So black people used as commodities produce the commodity, for example, of sugar, cocoa, coffee. Then these products, especially in the middle of the 19th century when marketing became more and more popular, were sold to the masses through mass production by using the image of black people. So when, let me see if I have an example.
Like literally on the label.
Literally on the label.
Okay, yeah.
So you have coffee and then you see the image of a stereotypical image of a black lady happy on the plantation to sell these goods. And back then, of course, it was very obvious and extreme But in a way, you still see it today, this commodification of the black body, the image of black people being cool and fun. And that's what hip hop, the image of hip hop is, and it sells. You see it in commercials for all kinds of products. I'm very active in the cultural sector, and what irritates me a lot, because nowadays, because of the whole anti-racism movement, everybody talks about diversity this, diversity that, and there are different aspects of diversity. I don't even like the term diversity, but the focus with these cultural institutions who say and perform diversity is always on programming. Yeah, so they invite a few black people to perform, do some spoken word, maybe a hip hop artist, make the best pictures, put it online, generate likes, but the structure of the institution remains the same. Sometimes they even generate records of money. Yeah, the Nieuwe Kerk, I'm just going to name names. The Nieuwe Kerk in Amsterdam developed the exhibition, the Grote Suriname-expositie. One of the most popular exhibitions in years of this cultural institution. A lot of Surinamese and black people joined. But after the exhibition ended, they had to leave again. But what happened with the profits? Was it reinvested in our community? Was it reinvested in Suriname? I don't think so. So that is a mechanism that I see a lot. They love the programming, they love the culture, but institutionally, structurally, not that much is changing. I think it's very important that we are aware of these mechanisms so we can resist against it and develop alternative ways of dealing with these institutions, set up our own institutions so we don't fall into the same vicious cycle.
And I think creating your own institutions is very important, or organizations. But for instance, if somebody is in a negotiation with a cultural institution, is there a way that that person can say, okay, I'm only going to do this, if you can also give me X, Y, and Z? What would your advice be?
I think you have to. I think that we are in a time and place where we do have the power, potentially have the power to negotiate. I think that often we underestimate our own position. And I can say that because I have experienced it myself and I have learned it the hard way. And I'm still learning. I'm not saying that I'm perfect. We also still, as TBA, get asked a lot, especially this week, this month, this year. Everybody wants to do something with Kitty Kotti. Even this week, people are still emailing me, hey, what are you doing with Kitty Kotti? And I think that because opportunities have been scarce for a lot of people for a long time, especially Black and POC people, freelancers, and they are quick to jump on the first offering that they receive. But even people within the institutions that I know now know that, hey, when I look at the offertes, so the prices that a lot of Black and POC people present, is much lower than the average, and literally average, white creative. So sometimes it's also a lack of knowledge and a lack of being realistic of our own value, because we're scared to lose this little opportunity here. Because what happens if we don't get the other opportunity? But I do believe that if you're confident in yourself, you realize what your value is, your cultural value also has an economic value, which those institutions need to stay relevant, to be relevant, to reach certain audiences, to meet their diversity criteria. They need you. So you need to be aware of your position, your value, and that allows you to negotiate the terms that can benefit both parties. And it's a learning process. As I said, I'm still learning about it as well. because you have to be assertive. You also have to be willing to walk away sometimes, maybe.
And sometimes asking your counterparts what they are making. That's something that I learned now. Like,
Absolutely, you know,
hey, what do you get? Yeah.
asking others within the field how they deal with issues. Um, that really helps. Learning from elders. I have a few people in my network who are also active in the cultural sector, who I can, exchange thoughts with. As I said, I have a background in business administration and anthropology. I'd never made an exhibition in my life before we started with this. 2017-18 was our first exhibition. Then we did our second one. A lot we did based on a voluntary basis the first years. In 2020, a few people tipped us like, hey, you should really, try to become part of the Amsterdam, zijn dat Amsterdamse Fonds, niet AFK? Kunstenplan. So the 4-year cultural plan. That's the level you need to get on. Because what often happens is that we are very short-term focused. So we do project after project, and then you have to write for funds at these cultural funds, and they mostly fund activities. They don't fund overhead. They don't fund personnel. So people work a lot, get burned out, and people tipped us, say like, hey, you should try to become part of the culturele plan, kunstenplan, sorry, art plan. That will give you a stronger position to develop as a institution, to develop a medium or long-term plan and vision, and also get some funding to actually realize it. Because that's what a lot of white institutions have been doing for decades or even centuries as well. And sometimes people say like, you're too focused on funding, should not, ask for subsidies and this and that. But there are hundreds and thousands of black people here as well. We pay our taxes, so we have a right to get a part of those funds as well. So, some people helped us to develop those plans, a 4-year plan, on the namings plan, the business plan, a cultural vision. And I have to say that it really helped a lot. We're part of the Amsterdam Art Plan since 2021 to 2024. And this year we're already working on the next 4-year plan. And I would love to see more black and POC-owned cultural institutions in cities across the country become part of these plans on the one hand, and on the other hand also develop their own more autonomous streams of income, of course. Because we deserve it, it's necessary, it's needed, and if we don't do it, other institutions will do it and only hire us for temporary positions while they build their institutions on the long term. I hope that answers the question.
No, definitely. Thank you for your thorough answer. Sometimes you do see when you have black or POC organizations, I'm not going to be shady and name names, but sometimes they have their own organization, but they tend to hire people in the highest position who don't look like them. Can you tie that to the psychological outcome of slavery as well? Can you talk about that? Like a crabs in the barrel mentality?
Good question. But the thing about the crabs in the barrel mentality, I always said, okay, yes, it's true. There's here and there definitely that mentality that people don't. What's the English word for gunnen? Elkaar niet gunnen. It's a very Dutch word. But there's some distrust amongst black people, POC. We have to break that cycle. But when we talk about the crabs in the barrel mentality, the question is, who put the crabs in the barrel? Crabs are not supposed to be in a damn barrel. They're supposed to be, out on the sea. Okay, there's something else. So what we did, also when we became part of the Amsterdam Art Plan, we had to professionalize and hire a zakelijk leider, a business leader. The challenge was that there were quite few business leaders, zakelijk leiders, in general in the cultural sector, and definitely those with a black or POC background. So sometimes it's also about, giving people a shot and looking at it from a medium to long-term perspective. Yeah? Giving people an opportunity to grow, giving people the space to make mistakes. So we hired someone we already knew who didn't have a business background, not even a background in the cultural sector. Because what is very important to us are, what are your values? Our values are central, and these are things that, it's learning by doing for us as well. And we started as a grassroots. We never started with the idea that we want to set up a archive or we want to become a cultural institution. It was literally a student movement which kind of organically grew into what we do now. So what I also learned since we're part of that art plan is that on the one hand, to be able to sustain and develop the organization, it is important to, have a solid governance structure. Your administration, financial administration needs to be in order. But the foundation should remain strong. Your values, what is your vision? What do you want to contribute to society? What do you want to contribute to the community? So we learned that it's very important to have community-driven people. Because what I noticed that when you get more funds, you set out a job, vacature, job offering, a lot of people respond, and they may have the great, curriculum vitae, the great resumes. But if people are more focused on career and personal development and their own individual goals, and put those before the needs or the goals of the organization and what the community needs, then it becomes a problem. So we were able to hire someone who did not have the experience as a zakelijk leider, a business leader, but we knew has the values that we share and has the motivation, the passion. And throughout the years, we grew together. As we speak, we're literally working on our accountants controller. I don't know why AFCA, but they put the deadline on July 1st. I think it's preposterous. So we have to work on it tomorrow. But we grow together, we learn together, and that's how we can, create opportunities for people who did not have the opportunity for a long time, especially in this sector.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Let me just check with Aruna because I can probably talk for hours still. How much time do we have? Okay, so can we go to the Q&A for a few minutes still? If there's any questions? Yeah? Thank you, Mitchell, for this conversation.
Someone has a question?
Don't be shy.
Is the heat maybe also? The heat and the amount of information? Oh, yeah.
Okay, and this is not really hip-hop related, but kitty kotti meer. Sorry, Dutch, English, whatever. What I'm having difficulty with is I'm from Curacao, right? Born, half raised there, half raised here. I didn't even know about kitty kotti until like maybe 5-6 years ago, because in my culture, it's not even celebrated. We're not talking about it. And I was talking to my sister who's over there, and I was like, I feel like kitty kotti is more of a celebration of Surinamese people than of my people. And I'm not sure, and every time I hear about kitty kotti, it's always about a Surinamese celebration of. And I'm like, is that the reason why my people are not feeling connected with Kitty Kotti because every time is a Surinamese celebration off. So we're like, okay, it's your celebration. Is that the reason, or because on my island also, I feel like Curaçaoan people are not as much involved in like the conversation about slavery and everything surrounding it, and Surinamese people are. So my question is, is this a legit feeling of mine, or am I still like maybe blind to certain things?
I would never dismiss your feelings. If you feel this, that's what you feel, and I cannot say that you cannot feel something. So, and I think the feeling is quite understandable. Kitty Kotti, I mean, the name already says it. It's a very Surinamese thing. And although the political decision was made in The Hague in 1862 to emancipate the people on July 1st, 1863, it had very different outcomes in, the cultural memory on the different islands. And I have to say, I also became more aware of that over the past few years, because indeed in Suriname, it has a long history of commemorating, even celebrating. It's an official national holiday, and it has been that for decades. Whilst indeed on Curaçao, as I've understood, because I'm not from the island, but what I understood is August 17th. The Aditula is a much more important day and part of the collective memory. So it's explainable why Surinamese people are more dominant in the conversation, because historically, and that's also what we see in the archives, historically, Surinamese people have been commemorating it publicly, partly celebrating it. I had a discussion with some people about it yesterday, that what I think is beautiful about August 17 is that you celebrate the resistance. What I understood is that people say like, hey, July, why would we celebrate July 1st? Is you cannot, other people cannot give you your freedom. Yes, your freedom is something that you have to take. So we celebrate the resistance, and I love that. Of in the Surinamese context, I think that, in general with cultural traditions, but when we talk about Kitty Kotti, what I partly also showed, in the beginning it was super colonial. It is a fact that July 1st was a randomly chosen date by a few white Dutchmen in the Dutch parliament. They actually chose July 1st because they thought it would rain a lot, it would be, bad weather, so people would not go out and celebrate and create chaos. That's what they hoped. The first few years, people were indoctrinated with all kinds of colonial Christian ideas, that they had to be grateful, sacrifice, did that, so everybody went to church, even thanked their former slave masters and the king who didn't do shit. However, throughout time, you saw that Kitty Kotti became a more politicized event for people to resist and think about emancipation and fight against colonial structures. Anton de Kom, there are many archival materials and things that we found in the archives. So in the Surinamese context, gradually, Kitty Kotti became not just a day of commemoration and celebration, but also a day of political resistance. And the power of these kinds of traditions is that it, kind of forces, it brings people together on one symbolic date to steer the political conversation, the public debate towards the topic that you want to focus on. The other side of that is that indeed it's not as inclusive as it could be. So that's, I think, a conversation that should be held internally within the different black communities. I personally think that we should commemorate, I don't even celebrate, I think we should commemorate July 1st. And we did start a campaign to make July 1st a national holiday because it does have political value. and not to, have parties or what that, but because emancipation is not finished, July 1st, 1873, so-called Emancipation Day, but it were the plantation owners who got compensation, so it was a reversed, it was a colonial emancipation. So July 1st, in my opinion, should be a very important day, but August 17th as well, as symbolic days to continue the emancipation. And I think we should learn much more about each other's cultures, histories. We have Winti, you have Tambu, so we can strategize together, work together, live together, and hopefully contribute to that society that we want our children to live in the future.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for this insightful conversation, Mitchell. Thank you for listening and engaging through the heat. Aruna, I think there's some more activities, right? Could you maybe tell the people about that? Yeah.
Next door at Annabelle, there's a dance battle. It's called International Dance Battle. And I think they have reached the finals by now. So if you still have some energy, peep next door and get a vibe from that as well.
Thank you.
And thank you, Kim, for the wonderful hosting, and again, Aruna for organizing this.